posted. Board of Directors meeting is an informational presentation about what a bond election is. And Simon Van Dyke is going to get into that. He is a contractor that works for the board for our websites, and also that company does informational presentations about this stuff. And he's going to get into it about hopefully general information, and then we are going to post this video on the district website and links to the slides and everything like that. And we want to do that before, frankly, before mailing ballots get sent to anybody. But also as a front end to further meetings, so that we have this background information about what this process is, and that we can then discuss the details about the actual projects and the actual financial matters with the financial advisor for the district, with the engineer for the district, and all of those things going forward, which is going to happen. So today is an informational meeting, and that said, is that enough?
Perfect.
Okay. Simon, thank you.
Absolutely. So, man, I'm a wanderer, so this is going to be hard tying me to one spot. So today what Michael and the board asked me to do was just kind of help people understand a little bit more of kind of how bonds work. I think, and we're going to get into this in a little bit more. But the most of the time when people have heard of bonds, they just automatically think of school bonds, and it's very different the way MUDs kind of work and function. So I'm going to get into kind of show some of that. How many of you guys have been around in this district with the previous bond authorization elections? Was anyone here back in, I think, 26? Okay, so a few of you guys. And so we can get into some of those details as well. But the history of this district with bond authority and how they've used their bonds is actually pretty spectacular. I will tell you, I'm a MUD director myself. I sit on a MUD up in the Katy area, and I was shocked and amazed at how well this district has handled their business with as little bond authorization as they have. I have issued more in my 4 years on my MUD board. I've issued more bonds than this district has ever been authorized for. And I have just a small community, 800 homes, right? So, a little bit smaller than you guys. But I'm going to go through there and do that. We'll kind of hit some of the high points. And so, like I said, I think the biggest difference that most people think about when they hear bonds, they automatically imagine that when something's on the election, we're asking to sell bonds. And part of the reason for that is school districts across Texas and really across the country, if they issue, for instance, I'm in the Katy area, guys, how many of you guys heard of the big bond that we did for the stadium and all that kind of stuff? I mean, it was craziness. Everyone heard. It's a beautiful stadium. It's not worth $70 million.
Would you stand on the other side of the screen for the cameras?
Oh, sure. Am I blocking? Well, then let me slide this back to the other side then. Happy to. Is that better for you? Okay. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I got here late.
Yeah.
I must have missed something.
Uh-huh.
Who are you?
Oh, my name is Simon Van Dyke. I'm with Touchstone District Services. We handle the website and do some of the communication stuff for the district. And so putting some of the education material together, this is the same kind of stuff that we're going to be putting on the website. And so they said, hey, can you come help us just kind of go through all this? So the subsequent meetings that Michael was just speaking on are going to be more in-depth. The engineer is going to be able to dig into some of the projects and all this kind of stuff. This is more of an educational piece, so we understand that. But getting back to the original concept that I was talking about, a school, for instance, you might have a bond election, and they might ask for $300 million. And the moment the voters say yes, they go and issue all $300 million because they're building high schools and junior highs and sports fields, and if you're in Katy, big old stadiums and all this kind of stuff. And so most people, when they talk about bonds, they're expecting that once we approve this, it's all going to get sold. And MUDs work very differently, and so that's kind of what I want to go through here. So there really are two phases that we're going to talk about. Bond authorization, how is that different from actual issuance or sale? Bond sale. And then we're also going into other funding options, kind of what are the two key funding things, funding components that most districts have when they're talking about handling larger projects. So bond authorization it's an authorization to sell bonds, but it is not a sale of bonds. The easiest analogy that I've ever found is it's more of like a line of credit. If you have a line of credit at your bank that says you can spend $10,000, you hope to never use it, right? You leave it there because it doesn't cost you anything to have the line of credit. You can have it sit there for a year, 2, 3, 4 years. Suddenly something happens and you have a major catastrophe, a tree falls, right? And of course insurance says, well, that's wind damage, and so that does not cover it on your policy, and now you have a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 repair. That line of credit may allow you to draw down on it, right? The other thing that's a key here is while the authorization is generally planned out for multiple years, it is not sold immediately. Like I said, it's sold as needed. So, and you'll see this in an example. I've got a graph of what the district has done over time. And the initial $4.7 million that the district had authorized way back in 1981 lasted them all the way up until 2014. And so that's again remarkable. I've sold more in 2 years in my district. But that's the key thing. Bonds may only be sold once the projects have been completely designed. So assuming this authorization goes through and the board says, hey, we want to work on the water plant, we want to work on the sewer plant, they're going to go to the engineer. The engineer is going to design out the whole plan, all the specs, all the specifics, all that kind of stuff. Then that has to go off for approval to the board. The board has to say, yes, I agree, this is what we want. And then it's got to go through a set of reviews at the state level. TCEQ, which is a Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, which is kind of like the Texas EPA. That's really what they are. They're the EPA for Texas. And they're the ones in charge of water districts and water quality and all the kind of EPA type of stuff. They have to approve it. It's got to get approved by the AG, that it meets all the financial stuff. Then it comes back with final approval. Attorney General, right? And then when it comes back for all that, then they still have to go out and actually see if anyone will buy the bonds. And that's when the sale happens. So there's so many extra steps to it. But the authorization alone doesn't get them there. As I said this before, it's not an immediate funding. Generally, you can answer this, Bill, if a district got authorization in May, how long does it generally take to actually get it out and sold and money in the pocket?
18 to 24 months.
I was going to say almost 2 years is my experience, 18 to 24 months. So that line of credit's there, but it definitely is not a blank check. And then the other key thing is the authorization means issuing the bonds become an option. Right now, the district is in the process of selling its last authority, which we'll show here in a graph here in a second, and they will have zero authority. So that's no longer an option should this newest measure not be successful. And so right now, it's something that's being taken off the plate just because that line of credit has run out. If this was authorized, then again, each time something comes up, they would evaluate that and determine, hey, is this an option or not? And then move forward from there to figure out what the most efficient way is. The last thing before we switch to the sale and issue side, this really is about having the district having flexibility. Right now, with this last bond authorization being complete, if you had a hurricane come through in 2 years and they have no authorization, the only option they're going to have to come up with a multi-million-dollar repair is to add it to water rates. And that just doesn't give the district a lot of flexibility if there is a large project that would be better financed over a length of time, right? And I think that'll make a little bit more sense. And we'll talk about the pay-as-you-go model. But in a large-scale disaster, having the flexibility to be able to borrow and handle projects in a timely fashion can literally mean the life and death, not of people, because the emergency is emergency and that's first responder thing, but in the aftermath, it can be the life or death of a community. You can imagine if the water plant went down here for a year, what would your community look like? Right? And so those are the kind of things that become a factor when you're looking at that. So What is bond issuance? If the district has bonding authority available, then they have the option to potentially look at a project from a bonding side. When they do that, they're sold in increments. So in general, a good rule of thumb is you're not going to issue bonds for less than about $1.5 million. If you have a little $300,000 project, you're probably going to try to do that out of operating expenses. The time it takes to get it issued and the cost, when you sell bonds, there's costs associated with that, usually makes smaller little things, $700K, $800K, just not effective. But if you look at something that's $2, $3, $4 million, then it becomes less effective to do the cash option, right? And so generally that's where they kind of look to see where that sweet spot is. And then the other side of this is when there's enough tax revenue to support the repayment. So if there's a project that Bill says needs to get done, but right now tax revenues are not where they are to be able to support it, that's a factor the board's going to take into account before they do that. Because in general, before any bonds are actually issued or sold, they want to know that there's not going to be a consequence to the voters' tax rolls. Because again, your board lives here too, right? They are part of your community. Prior to the bonds being sold, also, again, we mentioned this has to be reviewed by both the Board of Directors, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and then the Attorney General, right? It's got to meet all the regulatory requirements. They have to approve it. It can't just be, Bill decided he wanted to do this extra pump just because he likes it, right? It's got to be practical. It's got to meet EPA or TCEQ requirements and be appropriate in that whole process. Was that you digging extra wells, Robert? The other thing is each new bond issue has got to be evaluated against the other funding options. I'm going to show you the page you go here in a second. But that is a big key in looking at what is the best option for it. And then all of these bonds are sold at public meetings. This is very open, very transparent. Anytime a bond issue is going to potentially be sold, so part of that line of credit is going to be drawn down, there is multiple meetings, multiple steps, multiple input points that the residents and the board are going to consider before ever actually issuing it for sale. And then when it goes to sale, the financial advisor will place that according to all the public municipal bond rules. They will place that issue out there. They get sealed bids back. They determine which is the best one, and they pick the winner. And then whatever bank or entity was the one purchasing those bonds goes from there. And that is, again, too, if you guys are investors, those are tax-free municipal bonds. It's not the same as corporate bonds or any of that kind of stuff. So honestly, a lot of pensions, a lot of 401ks, and that kind of stuff invest in these tax-free municipal bonds. All right, the two different options. So most everything comes down into these two different pieces. The primary options available is to spread the costs out over time. So as an example, I looked, the average home value in your community is about $280,000, okay? $280,000. If you take call it $300,000 home, just for even numbers and even math we might use later, if you were going to purchase that house and you were going to go through and do a mortgage, you would be spreading that over 30 years. You have a reasonable monthly payment, and it's something that it's pretty common for most people. There's not a lot of people who come to the table with $300K in their pocket and decide they're just going to buy a house. They can, and it's absolutely possible, but that is really the how you compare these two. The second one in the pay-as-you-go requires a lot more time, obviously, and the other piece is really the only option that the district has is the water and sewer bills. There are no other funding options available to them, and so that gets felt quite differently, and you'll see here in a couple of examples. So with the pay-as-you-go method, the districts have to have the fund on hand before they can go to the construction project. They are not allowed, Bill is not allowed to put that construction piece out to bid until he has the money in hand in the account, okay? So if it is a $2 million well or something that's going to be built, he can't go out and talk to construction folks and to get that all handled until he's got $2 million in the bank. That requires then that you would have to raise the sewer and water rates, and begin collecting additional funds over multiple months for $2 million, it's probably going to be, you know, a year or two, and collect that money. And then once all that money is in place and he's ready, then he's going to go out to bid. Well, what's happened over the last 2 years to costs? Right? They've skyrocketed. So that $2 million project, Bill finally has the money. The bookkeeper's like, okay, Bill, I've got $2 million set aside. Let's go build that thing, right? And then Bill's going to go, it's 2.8 now. Okay, well, let's go back to the sewer and water rates and let's get to 2.8. And then when 2.8 is in the bank, the bookkeeper says, we're ready. It's 3, right? Because costs constantly go up. So doing the pay-as-you-go model becomes a challenge because you always have a moving target as to how much money you really need before that project can start, and they can't start it by law until the money is in the bank for it. The last thing is all of that burden goes on the current residents. Right? So if you have that $2 million project, that $2 million project is going to benefit people who live here for 20, 30. In some cases, some of this infrastructure has served you guys for 40 years. Right? With a pay-as-you-go model, the only people paying those higher sewer and water rates to collect that money are the people who are here today. Right? So everyone gets an extra $100 on their water bill for the next 18 months, 20 months, 24 months, so that Bill's got enough money to start that project. And then he puts it in, the project's paid for, and then 5, 10 years from now, you got a bunch of millennials come move in, and they're not paying for that bit. That bit's already been paid for. And so pay-as-you-go puts all the burden on the people who are currently here today, right? As soon as that project's done, that burden's not there. Whereas with a bond, it's spreading out over 25 years. People who move in here in 10 years are still going to be paying a smaller portion, but they're going to be paying for that thing that they're still getting benefit from, right? And so in addition to the delays I described, I think that's the other piece is the kind of shared piece. So with bond authorization, again, the board's spreading the costs over a long period of time. The projects, both current and future residents and businesses in the district are paying for it, and it does enable the community, the district, to be able to handle projects quickly. So if there is a catastrophic failure or an emergency or some sort of a hurricane or something like that, it's able to be handled on a quicker note. So here's the example. A lot of people say, all right, Simon, the difference between pay-as-you-go and bond, can you actually put that into real numbers for me? So right now, currently, Bill has submitted, the board has approved, and Bill has submitted a sale of the last $1.85 million that has authorized with this district. Once that goes through, it's an approval process right now with TCEQ. Once that goes through, the district will be at 0 authorizations. They wouldn't be able to do this again. But this is pending right now. Should the TCEQ approve it, the Attorney General approve it, it gets all the blessings that it needs, that would get sold later this year. Do you have a guess, Michael? Is that like a summertime kind of thing when that might actually go through?
I don't make those kind of decisions.
Realistically, by the end of the year. Okay.
Late summer, early fall.
Late summer, early fall. I was gonna say that.
We would hope so that we can begin these projects.
Yes, because they can't again begin until the money is in the account. So, but that 1.8 is going to get issued. When that 1.8 gets issued, the bonds are sold to fund. Again, that will be done in a public meeting with sealed bids, all that kind of stuff. And right now, the projection is it will not affect the ad valorem of the property tax at all. They've factored all that in with the additional costs, which, if you break it down by person, is about $6 a month or about $75 a year. And that's a small enough number that with their other revenue from maintenance and operations and all that kind of stuff, it won't affect the rate at all because they'll just shift some pennies around and the tax rate will remain the same. And they've planned for that. That was part of the whole factor when they had Bill run the numbers and they did all this process. So on average, it would cost every homeowner, if you were paying it yourself, which you're not, it's all blended into the tax rate, but it's about $6 of whatever that tax bill is. And again, that's going to be spread out over a long period of time. If you were to take the same project, and there are some costs to issuing those bonds. We're not going to get into details of all that here, but just to be true apples to apples and be completely honest with this, the example is there's some costs. It usually ends up being 8-10%. So I just assume the worst. I assume 10%. to say that there's 1.665 of money that's actually going to go into the ground or go into pipes or go into equipment, right? So I'm fair and honest, because if we were saving up money and doing pay-as-you-go, that's how we do it. If we divide that out and use the water bills as a funding source, the water rates would obviously have to increase in advance, because we'd have to save up the money, have it in the account so the bill can start the project later. You figure that out over a period of a year's time frame, it would necessitate a water rate increase of $79 a month to fund those exact same projects in a pay-as-you-go. And again, hoping that by the time we accumulated all those funds over that period of time, that the 1.8, 1.6 wouldn't change, right? And again, the financial burden would be 100% on the people here today paying that water bill up until the money actually is finally raised. Now, that's the difference between being able to use a bond and doing almost like a mortgage over a long period of time and having to collect every penny of it prior to. Which is why, again, if it's a smaller one, it doesn't make sense. But if it's a really large one, it starts to shift the pay-as-you-go versus the bond authorization as an example. Now, in both cases, again, the funding has to be in the bank. The bookkeeper has to have the money before either can go out to bid for construction. So either one has that. But you could imagine if it was a large sum of money being raised, that delay could be lengthy, especially if prices began going up on bill as we were getting there. So this is the history, and this is what blew me away. So the district started out in 1981 with just under $4.5 million. In 1983, they sold their first notes. It was about, I think, 1.8, if I recall. I've got the numbers in there. Those are accurate drop downs. I forgot to put notes on here for me to see. And then that lasted them, that initial infrastructure lasted them quite a while. In 1996, they issued one more tranche. And then in 2014, they only had $700,000 left. So even though they had more projects than that, they issued the last $700,000 and began looking to go to the voters to ask for more authorization. If you recall in the history, if those of you guys were here, they had 3 failed elections originally. They put $15 million out there.
The third one was successful.
The third one was successful. Okay, yes, you're right. The third one, so $15 million went out the first time, and the community did not support that. They went out again for about 10, and that was not supported. The final one was 4.5.
If you don't mind, I'll
Yeah.
correct you
Okay.
very briefly. It was, 14.5 on the first one.
I'm rounding. I apologize.
4.5 and 4.5.
Okay, yes.
And then, so the third one,
The third one was successful at 4.5.
yeah, about
Yeah.
4.4, whatever it was. But
And so, and that's what got us back. That's what got us back to here. And then, obviously, the district issued that first bond almost immediately, as soon as they could get the authorization finalized in 2019. And then they are in the process of issuing the last 1.85 that's remaining in authorization as we speak. So this really is the board. The board putting this on the ballot is trying to be proactive and get ahead of this so that once that 1.85 is sold, there's a list of items, and Bill's going to go through that with you in a subsequent meeting of things that are high priority items that they don't have the finance to be able to handle. And so in a public meeting, like Michael was saying, we'll be able to go through and even take discussion and input on some of that. But that authorization, and part of the reason we're not getting into details of it here today, is that authorization really isn't, the key is whether or not the district needs the authorization, if the board, or if the community is willing to support it. That authorization then, each and every time that they have a project, a specific project, your input is going to be part of that. In a public meeting, they're going to go and they're going to determine and assign Bill to go put a project together for 2.2 or 2.7 or 3.1 or whatever they need for the next most important things. And that's where there's input and there's opportunity. The engineer is going to go run the numbers. The FA is going to look at the numbers. And the goal is